Do you ever wonder what the women were talking about as they walked to the tomb early on the morning of the first day of the week of that first Easter? What do you think? You think they talked about anything at all? Even the kind of small talk that we so often make when we really don't know what else to say? Or do you think that the shock of all that had happened to them in the past few days was still so raw and so fresh that they just weren't in a place where they could talk at all quite yet? According to Matthew, the women already knew that the tomb had been sealed, so there doesn't seem to have been any expectation on their part of actually tending to the body, completing the burial process that may well have been cut short on Friday because of the start of the Sabbath. But if that's so, then why were they going to the tomb at all? Or maybe it was just like some things we do, just something that they felt they had to do without themselves even knowing why. But what were they thinking about in those last few minutes before their whole world was utterly shaken and their lives changed forever? Of course, their lives had already been changed by the events of the past few days. The followers of Jesus, both men and women, were all different people by then. Different people, no doubt shaken and humbled by the shocking series of events that had turned their world upside down. Things that none of them had seen coming and that seem now to have dashed all of their hopes and dreams completely. Confronted by the seeming finality of their Lord's death, and after all, what seems more final to us than death, and by the likely demise of their hopes for the future as a result of his death, I'm sure that there was no more of that bold talk that had marked the gathering of the disciples just a few days before, when they had all reacted with shock and indignation to the very suggestion that one of them could betray Jesus, to a man had sworn that they would never be the one to do such a thing. And yet, of course, before that night was out, every single one of them had abandoned Jesus and fled. Judas, the one who did betray him, was himself now dead, having taken his own life, consumed by guilt and grief. So now all that was left for the women to do was to mourn the lifeless body, to mourn the death not only of their master but of their dreams, while the others, the so-called disciples, all huddled behind locked doors, scared to death that they might be next. I think this is pretty much what you would call rock bottom. Those times that we find ourselves utterly lost in the wilderness and can see absolutely no way out of our predicament, which I guess is probably why the women on their way to the tomb weren't thinking or talking about anything much at all. Because what was there left to talk about? And then everything changed. And I mean everything. And it changed so fast, so radically, so utterly, completely, that I'm not sure that even those two women who were there could have realized what was actually happening. Or just as it took the early Christians a long time to find even the words with which to speak about the death of Christ, so too was the occurrence of the resurrection so far out of the ordinary, something so little expected, an event so utterly remote from the logic of their world, that I'm not sure they realized even a fraction even a tiny fraction of the significance of what it was they were seeing, the miracle of which they were the first witnesses. Which is why I suspect the accounts of the resurrection preserved for us in the Gospels leave so many questions unanswered. I mean, who goes to a grave expecting to find what they found and then be prepared to take notes? So not surprisingly, the accounts of that discovery tend to be fragmentary, containing almost random bits and pieces of information, the kind of little things that we tend to seize upon and remember when the big picture is simply beyond comprehension. Little things, for example, like the fact that after the angel had rolled away the stone, do you remember what he did? He sat on it. He sat on the rock. Now, why of all things did someone remember that and put that in the story? Why? Because it's precisely little things like that we do remember when we have no idea what's going on. And because the accounts of the resurrection are all like that, because they are so intensely personal and full of so many little details, those little things we do remember, there aren't many details common to all four of the accounts, just a few, really. But one of them is something I had never really noticed before, or at least I'd never really thought much about before. And that's the fact that in every account of what the women discovered there at the tomb early that morning, there was always a messenger. Always a third party, if you will, someone who delivers the news to the first stunned and uncomprehending visitors to the tomb. A messenger who in effect opens their eyes to what has happened and what it all means. Matthew and John both describe the messengers as angels. Luke and Mark simply call them men, but in every case there's clearly the sense that there's something very special, something very important about those who deliver the news. In a very real sense, the first evangelists of the gospel message. And while it's not important, really, where the messenger sat, that there always is a messenger is, I think, a critical part of the church's understanding of this whole astonishing turn of events. And not only as to what happened there at the tomb outside Jerusalem early on the morning of the first day of the week, but what happened later as that news, as that message was shared with others in the days and months and years to come. Indeed, what is happening right here at this very moment. Because the message shared by the angels with the women that first Easter morning is not just one message among all the others that taken together make up our story. No, that message, the message delivered that morning by the angels, that is our story. And it wasn't just a message for Mary Magdalene and the other Mary either. It's a message just as much for us here today. And what is that message? What do the angels tell the women and, in a sense, us? First, they said, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Now, why that needed to be said to the women at the tomb is pretty obvious, because they, understandably, were terrified. But why us? Why would we need to hear that message? Why should news of the resurrection strike fear in us? You don't look terrified to me. So why does anyone need to tell us not to be afraid? Why? Because for all the joy that surrounds our celebration of this great festival of Easter, for all the festive character of this occasion, and despite all the many times that all of us have heard this story, the fact is, the news of the resurrection is deeply unsettling news. Unsettling because it changes everything. We may not like death. We may all wish that there was some way for us to avoid death. But the fact is, we've built our whole world around the reality of death. And to question that, to begin even to suggest that death is not the final word, is to begin to question everything. And that's scary. For you see, the empty tomb is just the beginning. So yes, like the women at the tomb, you and I need to hear that first part of the message, don't be afraid. Second, the angel said that the one whom you seek is not here, he has been raised. Well, of course, we all know that. It's the reason that we're here today. And to us, that is the Easter message that the tomb is empty. But as is so often the case with the Gospels, there's a lot more to these words, I think, than we probably realize. Because it's not just what they expected to find there at the tomb that's different. It's everything that they expected. In fact, it's everything they had come to expect in life. All their expectations, all their assumptions, all the things that they took absolutely for granted. All of it now was changed. Because he has been raised. And death is no longer the final word. Life is no longer just the temporary existence of our mortal flesh. Life itself has been transformed. Because the Son of God, having assumed our humanity in his incarnation, and therefore our mortality, and in fact having died, and now having been raised, we have been raised with him. He's been raised. And so have we. And that, too, changes everything. It changes all our expectations of life and of death. Everything. But that's not all. There's more to the message than just that, because for all the celebration that this news so rightly deserves, there's more to the message, and that is that there's still work to be done. The work of building new heavens and a new earth, the new creation foretold by the prophet Isaiah. So the angel here tells the women to go tell the disciples. Now notice what's happened. The women are now the messengers. Go tell the disciples to get on to Galilee, where the risen Lord has gone on ahead of them. Gone on ahead of them not for the party that's going to be held up in Galilee, not for the big celebration to celebrate the triumph over death. No. Go on to Galilee because there's work there to do. And the same is true for us. Today we celebrate, and it's a great celebration, and you got to come to coffee hour because it's going to be a great party. But tomorrow we go back to work. This coming Saturday we need volunteers to help clean up and clear some vacant lots for Urban Tree to turn into gardens. Next Saturday we need cooks to help prepare casseroles for meals that will be served by the University City Hospitality Coalition. The first Saturday in June, we're going to need a lot of volunteers for Habitat. Long term, we've got to do something about this problem of gun violence here in Philadelphia, and we need some of you right now to be working with heeding God's call on that. And we always need volunteers for reading buddies, to work with the children of this city, for there is no one more vulnerable to the craziness and violence that is so rife on the streets of our city as the children. So we need volunteers for reading buddies. In fact, everywhere we turn, there's still work to do. Building this new creation in the power of the Holy Spirit, the same power that raised Jesus Christ from the dead. And every lot we clear, every casserole we prepare, every house we repair, every illegal gun we take off the streets, every child that is helped in reading buddies, everything we do in the name of the risen Lord, everything spreads the message a little bit farther. And that's our job. Because you see, now we're the messengers. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, to whom be all glory and honor, now and forever.